If you have a couple of different Jewish calendars in your home, or if you receive weekly emails from a couple of different Jewish organizations, you might have noticed that this week's Parsha seems to go by two different names. One name, the one we see in our Eitz Chaim Chumash, is Shlach Lecha, which are the first two words of the second sentence of this Parasha. Now another name, which I've seen on Sefaria.org, but it's also on some calendars, is Shlach, just the first word of that same sentence. Why these two names? And what's the difference between them? So Shlach is an imperative verb, meaning send. Like when you send a messenger to do something on your behalf, that's called a shaliach. The messenger is a shaliach from the same root word. Shlach is send, and lecha is a prepositional pronoun for all you grammar fans out there, meaning to you, or here in this context, more like for yourself. So shlach means send, and shlach lecha means send for yourself. Our Eitz Chaim Torah commentary quotes from Midrash to explain. Midrash is an early genre of Jewish Torah commentary and scholarship originating before the Talmud and long before the medieval Torah commentaries of Rashi and his contemporaries. So we read in Midrash, specifically in Bamidbar Rabbah, that it wasn't actually God's idea for each tribe to send a scout to survey the promised land when the rest of the Jewish people stayed back in the wilderness. It was the people's idea. The people, according to the Midrash, came to Moses and asked to send scouts. Now, of course, according to the Midrash, Moses wouldn't take that sort of action without asking God first. And so Moses went to God saying, this is what the people are asking for, they want to send scouts. And according to the Midrash, God heard this request and was not surprised, but also not particularly amused. After all, God already promised the land to the Jewish people as a holy inheritance and as a precious gift. God already knows the land is good, so God hears this request from Moses, and God knows that the people are struggling to trust this promise. The people want to confirm for themselves that the promised land is a place where they want to enter and dwell. So God responds by instructing Moses, speaking the words of the second sentence of the parasha, Shlach lecha anashim v'yaturu et eretz Canaan. Send for yourselves men to scout the land of Canaan. So the name Shlach, send, focuses on the sending of the scouts, while the name Shlach lecha, send for yourself, acknowledges that God's promise to the Jewish people should have meant that there was no need to send any scouts, that the people's need to see for themselves indicated they were struggling to trust that God's gift was actually something good, was actually something that they wanted. The name Shlach Lecha reminds us that it is part of the human experience to struggle to trust. Even when the gift is coming directly from God, when a situation is new and different, it can be hard to accept a blessing without first kicking the tires a few times. Now today, I find myself in a very special moment of reflection. It's the last Shabbat in the month of June, and my first Shabbat as a Dat Shalom senior rabbi was the first Shabbat last year in the month of July. On the Jewish calendar, I'm about a week or two away from completing a full year, and on the secular calendar, my 1-year anniversary in this role falls on Monday. I think back to a year ago at this time when I was looking at this terrain from a distance, getting ready to go up and dwell in this new land. And I feel humbled and very grateful that as I stepped into this role, I felt able to accept the blessing given to me by this community with a full and trusting heart. My first few days as a Dat Shalom senior rabbi were really profoundly delightful. The first day was a Shabbat. I had the chance to be on this bima and teach and lead services as I had done many times before as a student rabbi and later as a guest rabbi and scholar in residence. And the second day, I had the opportunity to officiate a wedding, to be with community and friends as we all celebrated the promise of possibility, of love, of family, of a new generation of the Jewish people. And the third and fourth days after that, there were the July 4th holiday. So I had a long moment to take it all in and reflect before I turned my focus to preparing for the week ahead. And as I reflected, I was able to trust the blessing. I knew that I was in the right place at the right time. I knew that I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. Now, this is profound for me precisely because it is definitely not always my experience, and it's not always the human experience, to be in a new situation and feel confidence and trust in God's plan. In most situations throughout my life, I've been like the Jewish people in our parashah, hearing that God is about to give me a blessing, but really feeling the need to fact check the details myself. I think that's normal. I think our world and our reality can be a scary place sometimes. Even though being alive is such a blessing and life is such a gift, there are things happening in our world right now that would make any reasonable person question whether or not our reality is a blessing. As we know, last Sunday there was a protest outside a synagogue, one of our neighbors here in West LA, that turned violent. The synagogue was hosting a pro-Israel event led by a guest of their community. Now, that guest has been in various locations hosting similar pro-Israel events. In other times, in other places, there were also protests. But in those other times, the protesters stood at a distance. Now, this time, last Sunday, in our neighborhood, they did not. Anti-Israel protesters were aggressive and violent. And as things escalated, these anti-Israel protesters dispersed into residential neighborhoods around that synagogue. We are absolutely right to see these events and be concerned about our safety and about the safety of our community. Considering these events, considering how so much about how we experience our daily lives has changed since October 7th, don't you kind of wish we could send scouts ahead in time to come back and report to us what the terrain of our lives will be like in 6 months, a year, 5 years? Don't you want as much information as possible about what's ahead so we can be the most prepared? Also this past week, as we know, there was a major event in American politics, the presidential debate in advance of the upcoming election this fall. Now we know here in our community, the people in this room and the people joining us virtually, we don't all have exactly matching opinions about politics. We don't all support the same candidate. But I think what we do all have in common is that we're concerned about the outcome of this election. I was listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing podcast yesterday, as I do most days, and they provided their very own coverage of our American presidential debate, precisely because they know that the outcome of our election will have a substantial impact on Israel. So don't you kind of wish we could send scouts ahead in time to come back to report to us what the terrain of our global politics will be like in 6 months, in a year? Don't you think, even just a little bit, if we had a report from these scouts, we might be able to make the choices that are the best for Israel, that will ensure our safety and security, and please God, bring our hostages home? For our ancient ancestors in our parashah, they had the option of sending scouts ahead to bring back reports of our land, predictions of our future. We read in the Midrash that sending the scouts was an idea that originated with the Jewish people, and we read in the text of our Torah that it was God's command to the people through Moses that sent the scouts forth. But when they did come home with their report, when they did come home with their prediction, even that was not definitive. Almost all of the scouts said, "This land is a great land, but it is too dangerous. We'll never survive there." So spoiler alert, that's the wrong answer. Now just 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua, gave the right answer. Tovah ha'aretz me'od me'od. This land is an exceedingly good land. If God is pleased with us, they said, God will bring us into this land. Have no fear. If we are blessed with times when we can look to the future with trust and confidence, if there are times when we can fathom the unknown and trust that it is exceedingly good and that we should have no fear, we must be grateful for those blessings. We must not forget those blessings. When we know that we and our loved ones are in the right place at the right time, as I did when I stepped into the senior rabbi role just 1 year ago, we must remember the feeling of those moments so we can remember that those moments are possible. We need to remember that those moments of trust and confidence are possible because there are so many moments when trust and confidence seem thoroughly absurd and utterly impossible. The anti-Semitism that we continue to experience in our neighborhood, in our community, has definitively been getting worse. The political tension that threatens our country, our community, our safety, and even our families is continuing to escalate. Not only are we like the Jewish people in the wilderness with plenty of reason to fear and doubt, we don't have the options of sending scouts ahead and hoping that we can have trust and confidence in the report they bring back. But we have to remember in our parashah, when the scouts brought back their reports, it didn't help. It caused a massive fight between God and the Jewish people. And while there was eventually forgiveness, there were also consequences. For us, we can recognize that even if we could send scouts into our future, it might not bring us the trust and confidence we're seeking. So what we can do is continue to partner with God as we take actions to create our reality. When I began in this role a year ago, even as I had a transcendent feeling that this new step was going to be exactly right, I didn't expect God to do all my work for me. I prepared the sermon that I gave. I double-checked the directions to the wedding venue. I didn't expect God to magically provide me with words to say or the ability to find my way without getting lost. I trusted in God's reality, and at the same time, I put in my share of the footwork. As we look to the situations in our neighborhood, our country, and our world, I know that we will have no trouble putting in our share of the footwork. We will follow best security practices to stay mindful and stay safe. We will vote in our American elections, and we will continue to support Israel with political activism on our social media and when it is safe, at rallies and demonstrations in person. And as we look to the situations in our neighborhood, our country, and our world, we must support each other in having trust and having confidence. We must remind one another as we smile and hug and share bagels and conversation that life is still very much a gift, that life is still very much worth living. We don't know how things will turn out, and that's scary. But we affirm that we are alive right now. We are together right now, that we can be confident in the blessing of this very moment, that today is tova me'od me'od, that today is exceedingly good. Am Yisrael Chai, Shabbat Shalom.